Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're speaking with an actor, playwright, and director. His credits are many and include The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Old Henry, and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? We're pleased to welcome Tim Blake Nelson. Tim, thank you for doing this.
It is my absolute pleasure.
We'd love to start with our normal question, which is, how did you get to where you are today? Is this something you always knew you wanted to do? I happen to know you studied classics. I also did, never planning to do anything with it. But what was your path?
Well, in terms of the classics, I was going to do something with it. I was possibly going to teach, which is the most direct result of studying the classics that there can be, and probably the most useful result, at least as it directly relates to the material itself. And then I was maybe going to be an archaeologist and possibly an underwater archaeologist.
Wow.
I certainly never imagined when I was setting out to go to college from Oklahoma that I would be able to pursue a career in the arts, even though it was a fantasy of mine growing up. But I just didn't think that world was accessible for a person like me. And this initially was even underscored when I got to college and freshman year auditioned for a couple of plays and failed. And roles went to kids from bigger cities who'd been exposed to stuff to which I simply hadn't been exposed growing up in Oklahoma, even though I did go to a rather impactful arts camp at Northwestern called the National High School Institute that taught radio, TV, and film, and acting, and I believe dance. But I still didn't think that the world of the arts was penetrable for a kid. It was stupid of me, but and strangely naive, even though that's an odd word to use for it. But it just didn't feel like that world was accessible to me. But then I started getting cast in plays eventually, and I started meeting the kids from the bigger cities and like New York, LA, Chicago, really specifically, and realized that we were all kind of alike, and that actually having grown up in the Southwest advantaged me in certain respects, particularly when it came to roles from that area of the country. And also I had a facility with dialects, perhaps because I'd grown up in that area of the country and used to imitate people from small towns, hopefully never in a condescending way. And then I got into grad school as an actor, and at that point, obviously had decided that I wanted to pursue a career and that maybe it could all work out. But I was always attended by a measure of doubt. I remember when I first signed with an agency, which happened while I was at Juilliard, the agency contracts were union contracts. And I said, "Oh, Actors Equity and SAG, do you think I'll ever actually be in those unions?" And the agent looked at me like I was out of my fucking mind. And he said, "Well, if I didn't believe you were going to be in these unions, we wouldn't be investing in you, of course." And so it's always been a bit of a surprise for me that I've had any success, and it continues to be.
How important was it getting an agent then?
It's essential as an actor. The way it worked then, and I suppose it's less true now because the internet has democratized the way that we can be exposed to others and create an audience for ourselves. But back then, the only way you could get an audition for anything in film and TV was through an agency. There were some projects that would advertise in backstage, and they were what were called open calls, but really you needed an agent. So it was very important. And I would also say that it was important for my confidence as well. I'm sure anyone would say that.
Had you done some jobs without an agent?
I did. Funnily enough, I did. I did street theater when I was at Juilliard. Mm-hmm. I had this friend, Joe Lucas, who was a classmate at Juilliard. And we made these characters up who were these hicks who'd been around for millennia. And we would spin these yarns together improvisationally based on input we'd get on the street from people passing by. So a person would walk by and they'd stop. We had a little bucket and we had about a 8-foot by 4-foot piece of AstroTurf. And we sat on these lawn chairs and smoked cigars. And we dressed in leisure suits with these sort of Southern gentlemen's hats. And a person would stop and we'd say, well, where are you from? And the person would say, well, I'm from London. Oh, is that right? It's interesting. We used to hang out with Churchill. And during the bombings in World War II, I was smoking a stogie with him, and he was so drunk that he vomited in his bathtub. And we just make up these stories, and then my partner would say, "Oh yeah, and then we would say it reminds me of when I was drawing up a battle plan with Alexander the Great." And we were heading north through what's now modern day Croatia, and I had been playing for the Croatian soccer team. This was, and we would just on and on, and I was the first person. I invented the pipe bomb, and that kind of thing, and
yeah.
And so we got hired. First of all, we got put in theaters all over downtown, off-Broadway theaters that were doing experimental stuff. And then we were put on MTV. This young executive named Debbie Liebling, who ended up being an executive at Comedy Central and she was right under Donna Langley at Universal. She's a wonderful independent producer now, but she put South Park on television and she put Pen 15 on television. She's a big deal now. And at that time, she was my age. We're about the same age. And she put us on MTV. And that happened without an agent, just by doing street theater.
Wow. That must have helped you get an agent.
It helped.
Being on MTV.
Yeah, it helped me get an agent, and it led to other stuff. And I think that doing what each of us does, I mean, this is true for anyone, whether they're in front of the camera or behind the camera or running the camera department. There are just moments when things happen that give you the encouragement without which you really wouldn't continue.
That's true.
Very true.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, when did you start writing, though? Because if you were pursuing acting, what made you start writing?
I started writing at Juilliard because I missed the academic rigors of college. And I'd had such an academically driven and intense time for 4 years in college studying classics, but also studying history and philosophy, and I'd so relished that, and I'd so grown from that, that when I went to Juilliard and encountered such focus on, yes, the imagination, which any good acting program helps to nourish and fortify, but also just the technical, the all the technical training that goes into becoming a theater actor, which is what that training was for. So dance, movement, voice, speech, many voice classes at the same, you didn't at Juilliard just have one voice class. You effectively had 3 every semester, and you had 2 dance classes and then movement classes in addition to that. And you were always working on Shakespeare, and there are a lot of technical demands with working on Shakespeare that are just as technique oriented as they are demanding of the imagination. And I missed the other stuff. I missed reading books and discussing books, and I missed writing. And I just thought 4 years of this, because Juilliard is the one actor training program, most are 2 or 3 years, Juilliard is 4. And I thought, I'm just going to go crazy here if I don't sort this out. And so every semester I would, independent of the curriculum, assign myself certain challenges. And the goal was to write a full-length play by the 4th year, and just to train myself up for that. So I started writing 1 acts and monologues, and I did 1 full-length sort of improvisational piece. And then in my 4th year, I wrote my first full-length play. And it was really just because I was not entirely fulfilled with the training, even though it was great training.
And what was the play?
It was a play called Cyrus. It was a Depression-era story, which is funny because Roger, you and I met, and James, we all met on the Coen Brothers Depression-era story, but this was a rather different one in its agenda and its feel. A family play that takes place on a farm out in western Oklahoma with a disabled child who's being cared for by her grandfather while her parents are off trying to get work elsewhere. And then they come back because they want to take the child, and the grandfather is fighting to keep the child. And so it was a sort of Sam Shepard-esque family drama. And it was, again, this dramaturg named Mark Bly, who worked at a wonderful regional theater at the time, Seattle Rep, which is still a wonderful regional theater, read it and invited me out to workshop the play at Seattle Rep. And that was, again, one of those moments. Nothing ultimately came of it because the play was workshopped for 2 weeks, but it still has never been produced. But it was just the encouragement I needed at the time to suggest that perhaps I could be a playwright. And so as a result, I wrote my second play, and that did get produced. And then I eventually made that into a movie.
That was Eye of God.
Yeah,
right?
Eye of God.
I read that you developed it at the Sundance Institute. Is that right?
I did. I developed it at the Sundance Institute as a movie script and then as something that I would end up directing. And again, maybe this is going to be the theme of the of the podcast, is those moments of those moments of encouragement that we all need. And I tend to keep looking at life that way, even at the age of 60, when by all accounts I have a secure career. I find it's healthy to continue looking for those moments of encouragement. And that
yeah.
certainly was the case with Sundance. They brought the screenplay on, and I worked on it at the Writers Lab with some incredible people, notably Callie Curry, screenwriter of Thelma and Louise, which she's now turning into a musical.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
I can see that
with Nico Case.
Oh wow.
And she's of course married to T-Bone Burnett, so everything goes full circle.
But how did you tie up with this? How did that happen with the Sundance Institute? How did that come about?
They're really good about finding you, and so they effectively. And now I'm one because I've been through every program at Sundance, and have been quite involved with the Institute as a teacher as well. But they have scouts out there. And every year in usually August, all of us get emails. And the emails say, if there's anyone you meet, if there's any script you read that you think would benefit from our program, let us know and let them know about us. And so I was approached by 3 people, Wendy Ettinger, a woman named Rachel Chanoff, and a woman named Ruth Cohen. And all of them were affiliated with Michelle Satter out at the Institute. And I submitted the screenplay. It's a long and rigorous process that winnows down and down and down and down, and out of, at this point, it's probably thousands of entrants, just like the festival itself. They choose 8. And
Wow.
I think at a certain point, it becomes about the reasons that certain projects are taken and others are rejecting it or aren't taken. It's ineffable. I wouldn't even be able to begin to describe why stuff gets chosen, and certainly why my script got chosen, but it did. And then that led to the Director's Lab, which is a different kind of process. The Writer's Lab, you go out for a little under a week. There are 8 of you, as I said, and there are nearly as many advisors. They're all screenwriters. Another one was Christopher McQuarrie,
Oh, yeah.
who wrote Usual Suspects. And you meet one-on-one with each of them. And they've read your script, and they give you really detailed notes. And they also, even more importantly, listen to your ambitions for the material. And then you meet the fellows, and you watch movies, and you dine together. And it's just this magical week in the snow in the middle of winter out in Utah, up at the resort, the Sundance Resort. And they put you up in a lodge. It's beautiful. But then you return if you get to do the Director's Lab, and it's also just 8 directors. Almost all of them are writer-directors. And just as many advisors, sometimes more. And it lasts 3 weeks, and they cycle new advisors in every week or so. Some stay for the full 3 weeks. And you direct scenes, and they bring actors out, and they cast your scenes. And this is all free, by the way. And the advisors, I mean, Roger, have you ever been an advisor there?
No, I have not.
So you would be a great advisor, and you would come onto the set of one of they're called fellows, young directors, and you would watch and just advise. I mean, it's funny. You get some really strange bits of advice. Everything from ad hoc comments like, "Are you sure you want to be over here? If you moved a little bit to the left, you could add this foreground element, and your the composition would be a little more balanced. And then maybe if you put the camera on a slider, you can push past the foreground element, and it might help this moment." And you get that kind of advice, and it's invaluable and extraordinary from a person like Roger Deakins. or Redford, Robert Redford will come on, or John Avnet, or Miguel Arteta did it with me. And I advised. But then I got this great piece of advice from Alan Davio, the longtime cinematographer for Steven Spielberg before Janusz Kaminski took over that position. And he said, you got to be careful as a director what you say. I was with Steven once, and we were looking at this landscape, and he said, it's just too bad. This would be perfect if that tree weren't there. They cut the tree down without even asking. And it was a 200-year-old tree. And just because Steven mentioned it, and I just thought, oh my God. And I said to Alan, I'm a first-time director. I don't think anybody's going to be... I don't know how... It's a great story. I don't know how useful it is.
Yeah.
You took the script and then you directed it theatrically first? And were you still acting at the same time you were doing all of these things?
I was still acting, and no, I did not direct it as a theater piece. I don't direct my plays. I'm still writing plays, and my longtime collaborator has always been this wonderful theater director named Doug Hughes. My new play that is going to be going up a year from the fall, I do have a new play, but it's a year away, is going to be directed by another longtime collaborator of mine, but he's directed me in theater as an actor. He's never directed one of the plays I've written, a guy named Mark Wing Davey, who's been a bit of a mentor to me. Fun fact, he was the original Zaphod in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the radio play in England. Anyway, he's going to direct my next play. But I don't direct my plays because I have not devoted my life to conceptualizing theatrically as a director. And I think that's what you need to do and be as a theater director. Yes, they call it a playwright's medium, and I believe that's generally true, but to make a live event in the theater and to understand how to make the production of the play something that could only be done in a theater takes someone who has devoted his or her life to that. And that's just not me. I don't conceptualize theatrically. And that goes from everything from how you do scene changes to top light versus side light and the rhythm of a thing and the production design and wardrobe and a coherent color palette theatrically. Whereas in movies, the screenplay is not, the screenplay is the blueprint for the movie. And so I think it's perfectly logical, particularly if one has great production design and a great DP and a great AD also, and a costume designer, and can choose the right composer and sound mixer. Then a director who has written the screenplay as well, is probably the right person to direct it, so long as he or she is willing to collaborate, and more importantly, as long as he or she or they want to do it. I think the reason many screenwriters don't direct their own screenplays is because they're not interested in doing it. They think that's the last thing I want to do. It's such a huge job. And you either are really excited by the prospect of that and the challenge of that, or you kind of want to stay doing what it is you do, and you feel like you can have more of an impact in that way.
Does it mean when you're directing it as a film, you're not so wedded to the material as if you? I kind of trying to understand the difference that you're.
No, I mean, I think I get
creating a world for theatre and creating the same world for a camera. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very good question. I just think that the parameters for conceptualization are just different in theater than they are in film. And they're much wider. Strangely, I think they're much wider in theater, even though you would say, hang on, the camera can go anywhere. And now we can do all these digital effects so you can kind of create anything. How on earth can you say that the parameters are wider in theater? It seems theater would be much more limiting. But it's not, because the theatrical event is always going to be more conceptual. It's going to be leaning on much more on suggestion and provoking inferences among the audience member than a movie is. And again, I go back to the fact that you can read a play almost as a piece of literature. It's very exciting to read Death of a Salesman or Our Town. And you read, or Julius Caesar. In fact, you read those in English classes growing up and write papers about them. You don't read screenplays. Screenplays are like architectural designs, whereas plays are already kind of a piece of literature. And so the wedding of a theater director with that, and the thinking that has to go into, okay, how do I make this an event inside a theater, is just different from film. There's a great example that's on Broadway right now, which is Daniel Auken's production of Stereophonic. And what it is it's a play about the making of an album. And in the play, you meet all the members of this group, which is sort of like a Steely Dan type group. And you experience all the internecine conflicts between the people. Some are sleeping with each other. One guy's an alcoholic, but they all capture lightning in a bottle and make this extraordinary music. At pretty much about the same time, I think Amazon did a show that was quite similar called Daisy Jones and the Six. Well, for Daisy Jones and the Six, the filmmakers went around Los Angeles and they found a lot of the real locations, and they researched it, and the showrunners collaborated with the director, the DP, the actors, and they made this wonderful, albeit somewhat soap operatic, but that's okay. You know, as Joel Cohen says, pretty much all television has the element of soap opera in it. But it was real, and you were brought in, and it felt like you were there. And the demands of the director on that show, or directors, and all the craftspeople contributing in the various departments, were huge. But the camera was pretty much where you would want it to be. There were close-ups, and it was done in very effective, but I would say ultimately responsibly unremarkable film language that didn't get in the way of the story and told it really well. A whole different deal with Stereophonic, which again, very similar material and telling a very similar story. So Daniel Auken, the theater director, put his entire cast, which was probably done with Daisy Jones and the Six, through a 6-month musical training process. But then, in addition, because they were going to have to play live music in front of audiences every night for this production, he had them learn to play together and play concerts together. So already you're entering into something that is a bit conceptual, and there's an artifice to it. And maybe they did that with Daisy Jones and the Six. But then he said, all right, now how do I make this a contained event in one theater where the camera can't, the audience can't move around? I guess you can. That's another thing you can do in theaters. You can have the audience move around. That's conceptual. But he chose not to do this. It's straight proscenium production. So what he did is he created the foreground of a huge recording studio downstage. And then about halfway upstage, he created the glass booth of the actual area where the music is recorded. And he staged the entire play in that proscenium look. And so half the time you have these actors behind a glass booth and you're hearing them on microphones. And then when they're playing the music and they play together, you watch them do that. And then sometimes when they're soloing the vocals for the vocal stem, the actors will come, some of the actors who aren't singing will be downstage at the mixing board. And then you're looking beyond them at the person with the headphones on, and you're hearing them on the speakers. And it was just magical. And you felt like you could only be experiencing this in live theater. And it was the most ingenious exploitation of everything technically that can happen in live theater right now, with a great sound system and miking, et cetera, et cetera. And it was fully conceptualized theatrically. And there was no space between form and content. And I couldn't have come up with that as the writer of this, but I certainly could have directed Daisy Jones and the Six.
You're talking about it with such enthusiasm. It makes me wonder, what do you get out from directing? What did you get from directing Eye of God as a movie then? And what was your aim?
First of all, I always want to be challenging myself. And what I loved about directing Eye of God, and what I love about directing movies in general, is that it asks more of me, certainly anything professional in my life ever has or will. Because as a movie director, and this is why so many people don't want to do it, you have to be, in addition to working with the actors and knowing enough about the other departments to be able to communicate lucidly and enough with people to create a cohesive and thoughtful whole as a result of the movie so that everybody is working on the same page. And already that's a lot. Being able to direct the actors, but also to speak with the costume designer and a production designer and a director of photography. But there's also the fatigue of it, the 12 to 16 hour days working in pre-production and post-production, because thanks to the Steenbeck and the revolution in what editing was that occurred in the 70s, you're editing the movie with the editor as well. And you're in the mix and, pouring over every aspect of sound. So it's this long marathon that involves a kind of unbelievable array of psychological challenges, technical know-how, and just pure endurance. And I just am one of those people who loves that challenge. And again, I completely identify with those who don't. I really prefer doing it when I've written the script. So once I did it where I didn't write the script, which it's telling that was my most successful movie. At least, financially. That was a movie called O that was written by Brad Kaya. But I like when I've written the material and can be fleet of foot with changing lines and working with the actors, and I don't need to get permission. And I also like working in the indie space for the same reason, where I feel like I have authorial control over what's going to happen and don't need to go and check in with everybody. Now, I've directed in television and have enjoyed that, but it was a learning curve for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because in television, of course, you really are answering to others. The director in television is a different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Why have you never directed, Roger?
You just kind of explained it very well, I think. But the challenge is, so you did a film, Leaves of Grass, right, where your main character, your main actor is playing two different characters. That seemed like challenging anybody.
Yeah, that was very exciting, and I wrote the role for Edward Norton without telling Edward.
Telling him.
He had almost done another film of mine that I still haven't made. And when I set out writing Leaves of Grass, I thought, well, this would be great for Edward. And then I went ahead and spent 8 months writing it. and then just presented it to him. And I honestly don't know what I would have done had he said no, because I don't know who else could have done the role. But he said yes. And but I got this guy named Gray Marshall, who was a VFX coordinator in the early days of that, who really understood that process. He'd done another movie with twins that Miguel Arteta had directed with Michael Cera. And he guided me through the process. And that's one of the great aspects of directing, is you get to be around these extraordinary people who've devoted their lives to a single department, or experts at doing this one part of the process. And there's so much to learn from them. I learned what a floating head was from you, Roger. And
it's done you well, right? That piece of knowledge.
And the people take such pride in it. And so I can't tell you how much time I spent on movies, hanging out with the B camera team, because they were always younger, really enthusiastic, not at all jaded. And if you ask questions, they just wouldn't stop talking. And so once I started to think maybe I wanted to direct, and there was a B camera team, I would just hang out with them and watch them interact with the DP and watch the gaffer and grips, deciding, what was going to be flagged. And I learned all the different terms, what a meat axe is and a knuckle on a C-stand, and, all that fun stuff. And on and on. Just like and Roger, I watched you on Oh Brother often going over and setting your own flags.
I'll not talk about that too much. People won't like that. Yes.
Tweaking
I'm very
deacons.
hands-on. I mean, but like you, I like to be involved, But tell me, where did the ideas come from? I mean, a lot of your films seem like they're set in, Oklahoma or that kind of world, and they seem based in reality, but also there's a lot of influence of the classics. Often a couple of times there's been a professor of philosophy, for instance.
I love ideas, and probably if I were to take a knock at my films, maybe sometimes the hand is tipped, or you can see this at work, and I haven't hidden it well enough. But I love ideas, and I love characters, either in action or in words, promoting divergent ideas and conflicts erupting from that. And so in a movie like Anesthesia, you have best friends from college, and one a drug addict, and he's the smarter of the two and the more creative of the two. And he's completely out of control. He's also probably the more likable of the two. His counterpart is an incredibly successful lawyer who has completely organized his life, but has largely lost touch with what was once more important to him. And they're at odds with one another in the movie. Similarly, Sam Waterston is this very rationalist philosopher, and he ends up crossing paths with the drug addict, and they're a different kind of counterpoint. And I like setting up situations like that with characters in movies. Leaves of Grass is very much centered around that. You have a Dionysian character in one of the characters Edward Norton plays and a very Apollonian character in the other character that Edward Norton plays. And that came out of a Nietzsche book called The Birth of Tragedy, which harkens back to ancient Greece and why tragedy was the result of the clash between the Dionysian and the Apollonian that occurs within man. And I wanted to write characters who embodied that. And that's Leaves of Grass. And so I often start from that point of view, which again, if I'm to knock, to criticize myself, maybe if I did it another way, my movies would be more successful rather than moderately successful and just for a limited audience. But those who do like the movies really do love them. I just wish that there were more.
Yeah. A funny fact I read, or I heard, I don't know if I heard it on the set or something, you were the only person that read Homer's original of that Oh Brother was based on, the Odyssey.
I consider that apocryphal. I think Joel and Ethan just loved to tell everybody that. And I think probably, I'm not sure, you'd have to ask them, but maybe George and John hadn't read it. Although I doubt that. I'm sure George and John had read it, Totoro. But I know that I know it was before I even knew I was cast in Oh Brother. I was up in Joel and Fran's penthouse, and at Joel's desk there was a copy of the Robert Fitzgerald translation of the Odyssey, and there was a Post-it note on it, and it said, "Soon to be a major motion picture from Joel and Ethan Cohen." In his handwriting. Now, to be fair, I looked at the book and it had not been cracked. You can tell. But I think eventually he did read it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the sort of myth that they never read it either, because Ethan said he never read it, but I can't imagine that.
But there's a difference between reading a translation and reading it.
Well, anyway.
Actually,
Okay, I did not read it in the original Greek. I read the Aeneid in Latin, but I was a Latinist, I didn't do Greek. So hats off to you, James. I guess you've read ancient Greek?
I was definitely a Latinist, but got into Greek in college because of reading the translation. And I would go up to the Greek teacher and say, well, this looks like this construction in Latin that would cast doubt on what they're saying. And they're going, no, it's a different construction. It's this kind of construction. So purely from this theoretical concept of the tenses and everything in Greek, I doubled in Latin. I did a graduate, because I'd done so much Latin, and an undergrad in Greek, and didn't like Greek as much as I like Latin at all.
My God, I'm very impressed.
No, I don't know, but I was never planning to teach it, so it was kind of crazy. But
I actually don't think I would have been good enough to teach. I think you have to be really, really great at it. I think that my acting career has been a great gift to the field of classics. For my absenting myself after my undergraduate forays. Anyway, I interrupted you. What were you saying, James?
Oh, that classics, the thing about studying classics is exactly what you said. You're reading philosophy, you're reading history, you're reading poetry. That's how you're studying it. So to me, it's a wonderful education, and it's something that I pull from just because I have the knowledge of those civilizations. Okay. Now you're laughing, Roger.
No, I'm not. I find it really interesting. But as a filmmaker, who influenced you apart from the Greek classics?
You're asking who?
Asking you, what filmmakers did you admire when you were starting out? Who influenced you, or were there directors that you worked with that influenced you? I mean, at this time, you worked with, let's see, Mike Newell on Donnie Brasco, or Terry Malick on Thin Red Line, or Michael Amareda on Hamlet and stuff. I mean, where do the influences come from, or does it come from all of those things?
Everyone,
all of those experiences.
every single filmmaker has influenced me, and also a lot of department heads and other actors. I just love the process of absorption that can go on a movie set. And so now I just get my guitar and hang out on the set and just sort of noodle around on the guitar and kind of sing to myself and watch.
You've been watching Ethan too much. That's what he does.
Yeah.
That's what Ethan Cohen with his guitar. You know, I'd be setting up a shot and he'd be in the corner playing his guitar or something.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess to me, the first seminal filmmaker was Sergio Leone, because
really?
watching those Westerns that he made in the 60s and 70s, I started to understand filmmaking as a subjective art form. And any art form is subjective, so that's redundant. But it's an intentional redundancy, because I think I knew that when I was watching anything from a Marx Brothers movie to a disaster movie like The Poseidon Adventure, or a thriller like The Valachi Papers, these are the movies I would see as a kid, or The Gang Who Couldn't Shoot Straight, or some of the Pink Panther movies. Those are the earliest experiences I had in movie theaters growing up. I still didn't, even while I understood it was an art form, I didn't understand subjectivity until watching the extreme gestural work, particularly visually, but also with sound, of the Sergio Leone movies. Everything conspired to work in a cohesive way in those movies, in a way that I hadn't seen another filmmaker accomplish. So that the extreme close-ups that he would use on those rugged, filthy faces, the decision to use actors like Lee Van Cleef and Eli Wallach and go right in on their faces, the coldness of the movies, the barren landscapes. It was all not only aesthetically coherent and just tight and riveting, but it was also always philosophical. You had you were in the presence of a director who was promoting a worldview, the limit situation of the West. And it blew my mind. And it was one of those moments, like the first time I heard Frank Zappa or Tom Waits or read Kurt Vonnegut, when I just said, "Oh my God, you can do that?" Yeah, so I was done. That was a very long-winded answer.
Okay.
Well, you seem to have a love for Westerns and other work. Is it just by chance you were in Buster Scruggs, but then also a film called Old Henry that I don't think enough people have seen, which I think is a pretty marvelous movie.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm very proud to be a part of that movie, and it's probably the most successful indie I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of its reach for what it cost. It directed and written by Pazzi Ponzaroli, collaborating with his wonderful DP, John Matishak. And we made it for under $1 million in Tennessee during COVID.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a wonderfully challenging, but absolutely joyous shoot. But yeah, tough. Some really tough, wonderfully tough nights and sequences, because the fewer resources you have, it goes without saying, the fewer resources you have, ultimately the tougher it's going to be when you're shooting a lot of exteriors, and I guess a good way of putting it is that when you're doing a Western and you don't have few resources, the dirt on your face is going to end up being real.
Yeah, right. Well, it certainly looked it.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's a great advantage, but it also showed how well and how you can make such an engaging, tense film being on one location.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically don't leave that farmhouse.
We don't leave that farmhouse much, although there are exteriors outside of the farmhouse, particularly with the door story. But the base camp for that movie never changed. So we shot on one ranch. And that's the only way that movie could have been pulled off. There was never a company move, ever.
How long was the schedule?
I think we shot it in 20 days.
Wow. That's impressive.
But it's really a beautiful film, and your work in it is really exceptional. I think you're really great in it. What did you do to? I mean, they ask, what did you do to find your character? No, what prep did you do for it? Where did it? What did the director tell you? How did that sort of role evolve?
Well, I was a producer on the movie as well, and this is a new. It's sort of a new phase in my career where younger filmmakers will come to me with a script and a lead role, usually under the misapprehension that if I say yes, not misapprehension, but the false hope that if I say yes, then they're going to get to make their movie. So I have to disabuse them of that and say, look, it's... but if their budget is low enough, my presence can certainly help at this point. But then I end up working with they'll usually ask me to come on as a producer to help cast other roles and to work with them during prep, among other things on the script. And so it's absolutely Potsy's script, but we worked for probably 8 months on it together. And so in that process, learned a lot about the character and learned a lot about what Potsy wanted out of the character and what he wanted out of the story. And then I have a new way of working, which was inspired mainly by Daniel Day-Lewis and working with him on Lincoln, which is, I'm not into staying in character the whole time the way Daniel does, because I don't have the energy for it. And I found I did try it on one movie, and I found that it sapped my energy. I needed to focus. For me, this is not true for Daniel, who's this other kind of being. I mean, he's I think once in several generations, a once in several generations talent, not once in a generation, but I think he's one of the greatest practitioners of film acting who's ever lived and ever will. But I can't do what he does. He's a freak of nature. So it's not that. I don't stay in character, but what I have started to do is learn the entire part well before showing up on set, no matter how significant the role, and no matter how loquacious the character. And in Old Henry, it's almost every scene of the movie. And so it really is about knowing the role so well and so deeply that you can come at it in any way from every direction possible. And that's from the most basic demand I place on myself, which is I don't even need to know what scene I'm shooting on a particular day. I could show up and it doesn't matter. I know the script so well that I can shoot any scene and know where I am in the movie, what the character, where the trajectory is for the character in the movie. It's just that much in my bones and in my being. And Old Henry falls in the space, in that space, in both respects. I'd worked on the script a lot with the director, and I had internalized the part completely. I also used to, when I would get a role, and this was the case with O Brother, Where Art Thou, I would be so afraid of not being able to get it that I'd want to assure myself immediately that I could. And so when I was offered that role, I said to Joel, I have to think about it for a night because I don't want to arrive on set and disappoint you. And I'd read the script at that point because he sort of threw me a curveball. He'd sent me the script without telling me why. And then that night, I just started doing the character, and I found a way in. And I thought, okay, I can do this. And I called him the next day and said, okay, I'm in. I would never do that now. I spend easily a month working on the script without ever saying a line or trying out any sort of dialect, voice, physicality, even if the voice is just going to be my own voice. I won't say any of the words. It's much more seepage than seizure, I guess I would say. I used to seize on how to do a role to fend off insecurity. Now I look at it and I say, I'm going to get this, but it's going to take time, and I'm going to give myself that time. And it's been a better, deeper way of approaching the challenges of each role. And it was really useful with Old Henry. Also Buster Scruggs. I was learning to play the guitar and working with the pistols long before I try my hand at any of the dialogue or the physicality of the guy, except for working on the pistols.
What draws you to a character then? What makes you think, yeah, I could do that? Because you must have decided that you're doing it before you start the process of just being with the character.
That's a good question. And I suppose at this point it's a gut feeling. Mm-hmm. And then it's a process of elimination. And probably a little less thought goes into it than you might think. I remember I asked Joel once about why they wrote what they wrote and directed the movies they want to direct. And he had a weird answer. He said, with us, it's like the path of least resistance.
I don't think that's weird. No, yeah.
And so a lot of it is just depends on what I'm offered. And that's limited. Old Henry, if it had been a studio movie, never would have been offered to me. Because nobody would have spent $25 million with me in the lead of a film. And so this was a tiny movie that came out of an algorithm that these guys thought up and developed by looking at what Westerns were successful and why. It's crazy why these guys made this movie. And what they learned was this is what they determined made the most successful Westerns. I don't even know if this is true, but this is what led them to it. You need a historical figure in there.
Oh, okay.
You need an actor in the lead who not only is credible linguistically in that world, but the audience for Westerns generally likes him. And the audience for Westerns is going to be your Walmart shopper and people in the middle of the country, and in particular in gun states in the South. And then the final one was, you've got to put a country music star in a role. And so they obviously, without, I don't want to spoiler alert, but there's a historical figure at the center of Old Henry.
Right.
I worked because of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" and in that I'm known in the South and, Walmart shoppers, which I love. I shop at Walmart too. And then they gave a role to the country star, Trace Atkins.
Oh.
They gave a role to Trace Atkins, who was great. He pulls it off. He's excellent. And then they did the final thing, which is they made a really good movie. So you could have all those elements, and you can still
I think
make.
there's only one really counts. I think Sam Peckinpah proved them wrong on three of those.
Yeah.
Instead of making a good movie.
Yeah.
Tell me, when you're directing, you're directing actors that are not preparing like you, and you're obviously directing actors in some of your films that are coming in for 1 or 2 days on a shoot. So how do you relate to your actors? Does your experience on set change the way you relate to actors when you're directing?
Yes, and the way I direct actors has certainly evolved. I don't know if I'm better at it now, in a strange way, but I have very particular tastes in terms of what I want out of actors, particularly with my writing. I think when you have written the material yourself, there's a way you hear it. Mm-hmm. And half the time you have to trust that and stick to it. But then the other half of the time, you have to be open to what an actor is going to bring and how an actor might surprise you. And so for that reason, again, going back to movie scripts as a blueprint for what the movie is going to be, I write as little acting direction in the scene descriptions as possible so that actors can surprise me. And also, I love actors. It's why I got into directing. Yes, I've taken probably well into 5 figures of still photographs in my life and still take still photographs. And so I care a lot about photography. But my way in was originally through acting and writing. And so I have to... It's beholden on me, and it's in my interest to exploit that. And I think you can make certain complaints about my movies. Particularly there's some of the blocking and staging and shooting in I can't watch it because I think that I could have been much more imaginative. And, there's a lot of standing and delivering of lines and an absence of movement, and it's just, but you can't argue with the acting.
Mm-hmm. Do you storyboard then? I mean, you've worked with, Joel and Ethan a couple of times. I mean, and they storyboard kind of religiously, although they don't always stick to it. But I mean, they have this sort of master plan when they go to set.
Mine is more in the form of a shot list, and that's been because I've never been able to afford storyboarding. It just, I've never been able to pay somebody to do it the way, properly. And so I end up shot listing, and then I do overhead maps and all the camera placement. Mm-hmm. And then again, allow myself to be surprised. But sometimes I allow myself to be surprised too much, and sometimes I haven't pushed myself hard enough. What's extraordinary about Joel and Ethan and the way they've worked with you and Barry and Bruno, and I guess Chivo did one, is, I don't think I've ever watched one of their movies except for Blood Simple and said, they're missing coverage. There are a couple of scenes in Blood Simple where they're in a 2-shot, and just knowing Joel and Ethan, I know that they didn't have time to film coverage. Yeah. But that's the only one. Every other movie, you're always where you should be in every shot. and the compositions are impeccable. And I think that's a result of them caring as much about the image, perhaps, as I care about the acting. And since movies are stories told with pictures, it's probably one of the reasons their movies are so much better than mine.
I don't know. You make very different movies than they make. Your style of movie making is very different, and you always spin together, a number of different stories in this one theme. It's the big challenges, aren't they?
Yeah.
How do you go for? I'm interested. How do you finance your movies?
Yeah, that's become more and more difficult, and we're at an awful inflection point right now.
Yeah.
So early on, I guess my first one was a combination of outside investors and some family money. It's funny, I had it fully financed, and then that fell through. So the part that was family money was a last minute thing. And then after that, I got them financed because there was just more of an appetite. The 90s, which is when I started making movies, and the early 2000s, there was much more of an appetite to invest in movies because you could make your money back. There was a very clear formula, which was get a good script with a competent director that's an identifiable type of movie, which is different than just saying a genre movie. Because genre movie now connotes a horror movie or a Western or a romantic comedy. I'm just talking about a type of movie, a drama or a comedy or a thriller with actors who make sense in their roles, who are known around the world, so that you can get pre-sales that'll effectively be your negative cost for the movie. So if outside of the United States, selling the movie to territories all over the world, you can get $1.5 million, then that's your budget. And selling the movie in the US is your profit. That was kind of the loose way of getting these movies financed. And that is the way I got every one of my movies financed except the first one, without exception. It was foreign sales projections, and those being the negative cost of the movie. Market, along with the US distribution market for art films, has utterly cratered. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And so right now, I don't know how to get movies financed. My son and I have started making movies together, my son Henry. Our first movie, which was financed by the guys who made Old Henry, who financed Old Henry, financed this movie in its entirety. And Henry wrote and directed it, my son Henry. And I starred in it and produced it for him. And it's called Asleep in My Palm. And it's really, really good and was very, very well received. And you can stream it now. And I hope anybody listening to this podcast will stream it. And I hope you guys will watch it. We're very proud of it. And it is a quintessential independent film. I'm in the lead as an indie actor, but playing opposite me is a wonderful actress named Chloe Kerwin, who just got out of Emerson College. She's 22 years old. She plays my 16-year-old daughter. And it's her first movie, and she's extraordinary. So you're watching the first performance of an actress who's going to, if she sticks with it, have an extraordinary future. It's everything an indie film should be. And it's a young writer-director and my son. And, you've never heard of it. And it's critically very well received. It's a moment in our business when nobody knows where to put art films. And because of that, you can't get them financed. And I don't have an answer except to say that I do believe people are going to continue wanting to see these movies. I do believe people are going to want to continue to see mid-budget movies, so your $15 to $20 million movies. And because of that, there's a market. The industry needs to figure out how to reach that market. The double hit of streaming and the streaming explosion, actually it's a triple hit. Streaming explosion, television has gotten much riskier and more interesting, and therefore more competitive with art films. And did I say COVID? Yeah, COVID.
Not yet, no.
Yeah, and COVID teaching people how to watch movies at home on systems where you can put in your own 5.1 sound and have, if you know how to calibrate your TV correctly, which most people don't, you can see a pretty good image on your television. It's not like the old tube. And now the screen is even in 1.8.5. And so art movies playing in art houses, which made this such an appealing investment in the late 80s and in the 90s and up until about 15, and then COVID just drove a stake through its heart. It's just that market is gone, and we need to get it back. But I think it will come back because people want to see compelling stories with great acting and photography and design and conceits told in 2 hours with state-of-the-art sound and projection. I don't think that appetite has gone. I just don't. What do you think?
I plead the fifth.
James?
I don't know.
It depends on the day. Some days we
yeah.
get quite discouraged. It's just, I hope you're right.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
But we really love Old Henry. I'm really glad because we hadn't seen it before. I mean, we thought, what are we going to watch of Tim's before we talk to him? And I thought it was really great. I thought it was a little bit of a take from past Westerns. And it was interesting. You were saying it was almost done like AI had done it, what makes a good Western? Because there were definitely things out of things that I'd done, like Jesse James. I know a few things in terms of the kind of choreography of the shots. I thought it was really interesting. But it's really good.
Jesse
but
James.
Great characters.
I love that movie. Beautifully done.
Yeah. See, you'd never make that now.
No way.
Yeah.
Well, you would
even with Brad Pitt.
You would make it for I don't know. I'm doing a Western in the fall in Spain though. That it's the real deal. Guillermo Navarro is directing it.
Wow.
You must know Guillermo, yeah?
I've met him, but I can't say I know him well or anything. But brilliant. Well, a lot of great Westerns were made there, weren't they?
Yeah. And it's an odd one. And I don't know how the heck I do know how they're making it. It's lots of soft money. So, and that's a whole other new phenomenon in this, how states and countries are helping to finance movies.
Well, that's in Europe. It's much more of that, isn't it? State finance. I mean, take France, for instance, even the UK. But I mean, there's no industry in the UK apart from what's being financed by America and being shot in the studios there. Mike Leigh struggles to get money for a film, and then he only gets like a third of what he needs. So,
and it seems like if the countries supporting in Scandinavia, there's that state support. Yeah. There's some really interesting things coming out of that. Yeah. So I would hope that would start improving.
Good choice, Spain. That'd be nice. That sounds great. And you wrote a book. I've just got to ask you because I read on Wikipedia, you wrote a book about Hollywood and financing films, was it?
Yeah. It's called City of Blows, and it just came out in paperback, so it's done at least well enough to have a continuing life.
Brilliant.
And I found myself in Los Angeles right before COVID, in the middle of an award season. I think I maybe even saw you guys then. And it was right as COVID was reaching our shores and the wildfires were raging in Los Angeles, and Me Too was in full force. And even though George Floyd had not been murdered yet, BLM was very much on everyone's minds. And so the novel is really about, it takes place in Hollywood at that moment, at this interstice. And it's very much about men who came to Hollywood and why, and how they behave toward one another, and how that ramifies. And yeah, I enjoyed writing it. I'd always wanted to try and write a novel. I got to the point where I had too many screenplays I was trying to get made, and I had a play going up in New York. So I was kind of covered in that department, and I'd already started to think about a new play, and I didn't quite want to start writing that yet. And so I said, I'm going to try a novel, because I have to write every day. I can't not do that. So I did. And if you write every day and you hold yourself to it and you keep doing it, what I guess I never really understood is that a narrative can crystallize. And if you give it enough time and patience and continue to believe in it, and you really care about each line and your prose, and you take that time and you revere the process, even while you're essaying it, then you can write a novel. I know it sounds like I'm making it sound so easy, but I guess to argue against what, to assure you that I don't think it's easy. I waited 50 years, to build up the stamina and that understanding, and to try and do it.
Oh, well.
I hope you guys will. I hope you guys will read it. It's called City of Blows.
Definitely.
We will. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Definitely one we're going to look out for.
There's
on Amazon, probably.
There's a lot about Latin in there.
Oh, really?
I bet.
Great. I'm in.
Philosophy professors, I'm sure, in Hollywood. All right, Tim, this has been great.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, you guys are really nice to ask
Wonderful.
me, and it's amazing to be in such company. I'm honored that you thought of me for this. It's really it's a real, I hope you don't mind my saying this, I consider it a feather in my cap that you would ask me.
No, thank you. Thank you. That's crazy.
So enjoyed watching the films that we watched.
Yeah.
It was great.
Well, thanks for doing that.
Keep directing.
It's wonderful to see such ambition, let alone anything else. They were interesting movies, but I mean, they're so ambitious. It's brilliant,
Yeah. It's good.
Great.
Yeah, well, take a look at Asleep in My Poem. I know it's after the fact, but you might like it.
Right.
We will definitely look at that.
All right. Yeah. Thanks again, you guys.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.